Welcome everyone to part 1 of the Heart and Soul series, and this will be addressing broken hearts and soul fragments. This is an extremely important topic that most of the time we minimalize what a broken heart means. Well, it means a lot more than what you think. And that's what this series is all about. Not only to help yourself, but to help your family members, to help friends, just to help those around us. Because as this world grows darker and darker, there's going to be more and more people that need to hear words of wisdom. And it's not our words of wisdom, it's wisdom from the Most High. So I pray you are blessed by going through this introductory series. And today we will look at how to commune with our souls for healing through what is referred to as the 5 V's by Dr. Bob Strachan. We are very much aware that today we face a very real and present danger of hopelessness, brokenness. As a great multitude of people, they live in fantasy worlds created by the prince of the power of the air. They seek fake realities to fill the void and numb their pain. Many resort to drugs, alcohol, escape rooms, gambling, social media, sports media, movies, music, gaming, and so forth to create their own inner world where they can find some kind of peace, some kind of distraction. They just want to run away from all the negative news all around. And many of them don't have Yahusha HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah, in their life to run to. So they run to these fantasy lands. And that is what Satan loves. They want people to waste their time and not discover who Yahuwah truly made them to be. But they are ending up in experiencing a false peace, a false reality, where worldly idols are exalted that are worshipped and bowed down to. Thus, we will see the great falling away. Because Yahuwah has told us that there should be no other gods before him. He is first and foremost, and he wants to be first and foremost in your life. What is really happening is souls are broken and shattered, and many people don't even know what's going on inside of them. They just know that something's not right, but they don't know what. Because they don't know what a broken and shattered soul is. And those things can be caused by stress, trauma, abuse, generational sin, and most importantly, lie-based beliefs. Their fragmented soul is draining the life right out of them, like a cracked cistern, right? Like a cracked piece of pottery. They can't even hold his words because they're so broken. And they keep on running to the wrong places for healing. So it is Satan's goal to keep them held captive in his metaverse, in this fantasy land. That's not a good place to be. Living in a fantasy reality is not a good place to be. Because that way, if they enter like into his metaverse, he can keep them imprisoned. He can keep their mind occupied on such. He can keep them in a death culture and on the broad path that leads to where? Destruction. He can keep them focusing on the minor things in life and listening to the short clips that tickle their ears but are of little substance most of the time. Satan doesn't want people to find out that what he promotes is pure fantasy. It's an illusion. It's a sleight of hand. See, he is the master of deceit, and he is a fake, and he is angry, and he hates mankind. Make no mistake of that. And everything he creates, think about this. Are you listening? Everything he creates is a lie and a counterfeit of what? Well, of the original kingdom he once belonged to, in the place where he once existed, where everything was real. Remember, he once existed as the anointed cherub that covered Ezekiel chapter 28:14. And he's not in that reality anymore, but he knows what it was like. So he counterfeits it, and he deceives people to go for the counterfeit instead of the real. So today, part 1 of our Heart and Soul series, the 5 V's to healing. I came across this clip. As most of you may know, Matthew Perry passed away recently, and he was a member of that sitcom Friends. But this was, I believe, a perfect clip to connect us to what a broken heart and a fragmented soul looks like. And I'll have another clip at the very end that will even give us more insight. So what is important to understand is that all people, whether believers or not, are broken at some level. The only difference between the two is who we end up running to. Because those that are believers, we run to Yahusha HaMashiach. And only when we run to Yahusha, the true Jesus of Nazareth, just as we are, we come to him just as we are, can the healing begin. But so does our struggle in the sanctification process of our soul, right? Because what part of you is saved when you become a believer? It's the spirit that's born again. The soul goes into the sanctification process, does it not? The healing process. It goes into a process of listening to his spirit within us to shape and mold our soul. So this process turns believers into overcomers through the sanctification process. This process sets the captives free and unlocks the prison doors that mends broken hearts and soul fragments, because people are imprisoned within their own broken soul, but they don't understand it. But hopefully after this introductory series, they will have an insight, at least an awareness, because you must have awareness first. You have to have an awareness that something like this exists in you. So this process sets the captives free and unlocks the prison doors that mends broken hearts and soul fragments. Yahusha, Jesus, is the key that unlocks life. He is the one that heals. He is the one that will integrate the broken parts. He'll integrate those shards of a shattered soul. You know how many shards of glass can happen if you drop a glass on the floor? See, Yahusha is the only one that can put that back perfectly. He's the only one. And he does that in his perfect timing. You can't rush it. You can't make it happen yourself. It's only Yahusha. The answer has been right before our very eyes, and I believe we have missed it. I know I did. I totally missed it. Totally. And Satan has worked diligently to hide and to distract. So this introductory series is for those that want to be healed, because otherwise Yahweh God will not force his truth. He will not force his hope. He will not force his love upon you, for he is a gentleman. He has proposed. He awaits your answer. The question is your answer to him going to be yes? And the other question he would pose throughout the scriptures is, do you want to be healed? Because if someone doesn't want to be healed, if someone doesn't want to put in the work it takes to be healed, then you don't have much to go on. An individual must want to be healed. So first, we must have an awareness of our own brokenness. We should realize we are on this continuum at some point in time. And at various points and tragedies in our life, it might be a sliding scale back and forth. So first must come awareness of our brokenness, then our desire to be healed. And lastly, we must fully understand that we must trust, we must obey, we must do, and we must guard the word and the way to hope and healing. It takes our participation because no one knows ourselves better than us and Yahuwah. No one knows yourself better than yourself. No one knows yourself better than Yahuwah. So Yahusha is the great physician, and if we take this relational journey with him, he will heal us from the inside out. So let's listen to this interview with Matthew Perry, and you will start seeing this more and more, how brokenness is all around. It is serious business, and it dangles a person between life and death. And that person may very well be in your family. That very person may be your friend. That very person may be in your community.
There's a question he saw me ask once before of someone else in recovery. He thinks it's interesting, so I ask him too. How will we know when you're in trouble, when you're not okay?
If I say, I'm just going to chill alone at home tonight. And part two, the other thing, is if I ever say I'm cured.
In 2004, I asked Jennifer Aniston about all her colleagues, including Matthew, whose struggle had become public, as his friends grappled too.
What doesn't Matthew know?
That he's all right. We didn't know. We weren't equipped. We weren't to deal with it. Nobody had ever dealt with that. And, the idea of even losing him or...
One of those 6 young friends creating a new kind of funny, a new kind of family.
Okay, who wants light cheese and who wants dark cheese?
Chandler Bing, played by an actor who was effortlessly so fast and original.
Someone at work ate my sandwich. Well, what did the police say?
And now it seems impossible that all those years ago when we were laughing, we never knew that the young star was fighting for his life in a riptide of addiction. It was pulling him to hell and back over and over again, and he was trying to keep it a secret from everyone.
Secrets kill you. Secrets kill people like me.
We see in Isaiah chapter 61, verse 1, and I believe we have missed a big part of this verse. It says, the Spirit of the Master Yahuwah is upon me, because Yahuwah has anointed me to bring good news to the meek. First and foremost, Yahuwah had anointed Yahusha HaMashiach to bring good news to the meek. But what's the second thing? He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim release to the captives and the opening of the prison to those who are bound. I believe all of those things are related to broken hearts and fragmented souls, because parts of our soul can be held captive. Parts of our soul can be imprisoned. So this scripture applies to us physically and spiritually, but most importantly, requires the Spirit of the Master through Yahusha to accomplish. Many of us have come to understand how to rightly divide his word of truth. We understand we have entered into the blood ratified marriage covenant with Yahusha, our high priest after the order of Melchizedek. We have begun to learn how to come out of her, my people, lest we share in her sins and lest we receive of her plagues. This is huge. This is foundational. And this set apartness remains a work in progress, not only individually, but corporately as the one new man, corporately as the body of Messiah. Because it is pretty obvious the traditional church and different denominations, fragmented, brokenhearted, and they're not unified, are they not? They're not. They're fragmented. We are fragmented and we are scattered corporately. And likewise with our soul, it can be fragmented and scattered within us. However, Yahusha didn't stop after he said he came to bring the good news. He goes on to tell us he came to heal the brokenhearted. He came to heal the brokenhearted, proclaim release to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound. I believe Yahweh really wants us to grasp what healing the brokenhearted, what releasing the captives, and the opening of prisons to those that are bound entails. We understand in part, but this too is a work in progress. You see, upon my return home last year from Sukkot 2022, my world changed in a twinkle of an eye. This past year clearly has been a Book of Job experience and a demonic attack upon my husband and family through death, through literal storms of destruction and persecution. Yet Yahweh works all things together for good for those that love him and are called according to his purpose. Therefore, simultaneously, Yahweh shifted my focus and lifted the veil on what brokenness looked like. What does a fragmented soul look like? I never gave it much thought before. And how the enemy hones in on such weaknesses to attack. Yahweh brought to the forefront that even his people, even his born anew people, suffer from weak souls. And apparently, Yahweh wants this topic addressed. He wants it understood. He wants his people strengthened because his return draws nigh. You see, if a soul is already weakened by brokenness, then when that soul encounters more stress, more trauma, more abuse, more generational sins, it becomes even weaker and darker. The soul is then more prone to demonic influence, for Satan prowls around like a lion, seeking whom he can destroy. Sadly, I believe most believers today have weak souls, mainly because of lie-based beliefs, because they're really shifting to the fantasy land. They're really shifting to the pagan reality and not shifting into his word, not understanding what he wants from us. Most believers have never been taught, nor have they learned how to strengthen their own soul, as King David did in the Psalms. The Psalms is full of strengthening souls. We must first be aware, again, awareness of what happens when someone is broken, and there must be a desire to be healed. Shame, pride, and embarrassment must not be stumbling blocks to receiving help, especially today with spiritual warfare being rampant all around us. There must also be a willingness to take an active role in the healing process, because no one knows you like you, and no one knows you like Yahusha HaMashiach knows you. So that time of communing with him, to speaking to your own soul, why is my soul downcast? It's perfectly biblical to speak to your soul. And we're going to get into that. So brokenheartedness and fragmentation cannot be cured by simply telling someone to just give it to Jesus. Yes, Yahusha is there for them, and prayers are powerful, but true healing must take place in our inner tent of meeting, our inner tent of meeting in our soul, the holy place. Because does he not dwell in us? Isn't that where we should be meeting him? In the tent of meeting as we commune and fellowship with him? He demonstrated that to us with the wilderness tabernacle, did he not? And we're going to get into that too. We're going to compare our bodies to the wilderness tabernacle. And just as Moses and Aaron would go into the tent of meeting to commune and intercede, we too, within our bodies, should go into that tent of meeting to commune with Yah. If a broken heart or fragmented soul is not recognized, if it's not dealt with, the condition can grow worse and pressure builds until it explodes. See, brokenheartedness was supposed to be a temporary safety measure, if you will, to protect the rest of the soul, but it was never meant to stay broken. He never meant for our soul to remain broken. It was supposed to be a temporary measure. And then we were supposed to be integrated again and be able to love him with our whole heart. So what condition is your condition in? Do you randomly get triggered by people, places, or things? Do you try to avoid certain circumstances? Are there grudges and unforgiveness you hold tightly to? Or are you struggling with addictions, fears? Has your soul been damaged by stress, trauma, abuse, generational sins, and lie-based beliefs? Did you know you could strengthen your soul? Have you ever communed with your soul? Do you invite Yahusha to help you understand and heal your soul? Some days do you say, I just don't feel like myself today? Do you get angry often or jump from emotion to emotion? Do you ask yourself, why am I feeling angry? That is a good question, because anger is usually secondary to a deeper root cause or relationship issue. The book of Psalms is loaded with David communing with his soul. He was strengthening himself and communing with Yahweh. It is my belief that Yahweh is lifting that veil on how to properly commune with our soul fragments. Instead of running here, there, to, fro, everywhere, trying to seek answers here, there, go to Yahusha. Talk to your soul. Bring those things before him. 2 Corinthians 4:16, therefore we do not lose heart, but even if our outward man is perishing, the inward man is being renewed day by day. Each day he can strengthen you day by day. Yahweh wants us to understand our souls more. He wants to see us move from that strength to strength. He wants us to be overcomers from things that have weakened and fragmented our souls, such as lie-based beliefs. He wants us to invest time in working on ourselves inwardly. As much as we devote to our time on YouTube or other external social media apps or little game apps, or our time we spend pointing out other people's issues, he wants to be our primary focus. You hear that? He wants to be our primary focus, and he wants us to fellowship and have a relationship with him. He is the only one that can heal and integrate broken hearts or fragmented souls. This tells us a very important fact, that those that have not built their house on the rock, Yahusha, Jesus of Nazareth, can never be fully whole. They can be helped by some of these processes, but it's only Yahweh that can make them whole. So shabar in Hebrew means to break in pieces, means to break down, rend violently, wreck, crush, quench, rupture, to be broken, to be maimed, to be crippled, to be wrecked, to shatter. So when someone has a fragmented soul, they are broken, thus having a broken mind, a broken will, and broken emotions. And each part has its own little reality, if you will, its own way of thinking, whether it's meant to protect you or whether it's a little part that doesn't understand what happened when they were little. They can have brokenness, broken mind, broken will, broken emotions. They need to be communed with. Our core self needs to talk to our soul, discover what brokenness may be within us. And we are going to see, by using the 5 V's, it's going to home in on what may have been the violation that caused the fracture, the break, the shattering. At some point, we are all on the continuum of the fragmented soul. It is impossible to live in this world without brokenheartedness. Throughout different seasons of our lives, we may find ourselves on this continuum at various points. The range can extend from a single broken heart to multiple fragments of the heart and soul, and if left unaddressed, can extend into dissociative identity disorder. The more severe cases can not only affect the mind, but can actually affect the neurosensory pathways of the physical brain. The key is to invest quality time with Yah, invest quality time with our soul internally and with one another externally to see where we are at and where our friends are and our family members are at mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. What is going on in our lives and in their lives? Because sometimes they don't even know what's going on in their lives. Look for any outward emotional changes to use as a segue into chatting with your soul or chatting with someone else. And encourage downtime from distractions, social media, iPhones, and laptops, because this world is full of distractions these days. So the most common causes of brokenheartedness comes from an acronym that we use, STAG, S-T-A-G, stress, trauma, abuse, and generational sin. We need to be equipped with tools that provide an organized approach along with good listening skills to be able to understand and relate to what is going on in our lives and in their lives without inserting our own perceptions. That is so very important. We cannot insert our own perceptions because what may seem minor to us is crushing that other person, So we have to be very careful not to insert our own perceptions. It's very easy to do, and more than likely, we've all done it. I know I have. Not meaning to, and I don't think any of us meant to, but it happens. And we will see that as we go through this series. Give our soul fragment or person a moment to verbally diffuse and debrief. They have something to say. Listen, right? Listen twice as much as you speak. If addressed early, many times this initial contact of being able to ventilate the violation experience will help tremendously. Then validate their emotions that they express. The only emotional response you would not want to validate is if someone is just having a pity party, like in the story of Jonah and his pouting over Nineveh, repenting. That should have been something he rejoiced over, but no, he pouted over it. and that was a pity party, and that would not be validated. So the 5 V's that Pastor Bob Strachan introduced us to are something that you can apply every day of your life. It's something so practical that you can apply it every day of your life, and especially with your own soul. So the 5 V's, the first is violation, the second is ventilation, the third, validation, fourth, vindication, and lastly, eviction. So the 5 V's is just an organized approach coupled with good listening skills in order to evaluate the needs within your own soul or the needs of someone else that has experienced brokenness from stress, trauma, abuse, generational sin. Again, that acronym is STAG. And isn't that a great way to approach this? And why this is so important? Why this is so important? Because there's not many resources out there, people. I'm telling you, there's not very many resources out there. Yeah, there's secular resources out there, and I'm not criticizing the secular resources. But when it comes to true healing, it needs to be Bible-based. And this has been the only Fragmented Soul series I have found that is a biblical-based approach. It tells us when someone needs healing in their soul versus deliverance. Because we see a lot of deliverance ministries out there, but are you seeing them test the spirit before they delivered it? Are they really casting out a demonic spirit? Or are they looking at that little part in that individual that is full of fear and it doesn't know how to deal with that fear? Yeah, there's a spirit of fear there, but it's coming from maybe a little part that needs healing more than deliverance. Hello, big difference. Big difference. We just can't be going around and doing a lot of stuff that we don't understand. So we will briefly discuss Pastor Bob's 5 V's, but the ultimate and the proper usage of the 5 V's are elaborated in the Fragmented Soul series by Pastor and Dr. Bob Strachan. He's got his PhD in psychology and his doctorate in theology, but he leans more on the theological side than the psychiatric side, even though he knows that psychology has some valid insights, but ultimately he knows who the healer is. And that's a rare find today. But he did this series for you, for me, because he can't spread this information by himself. He needs believers to grasp what he's trying to tell us. And this is one of the most important pieces of information I've ever came across, other than understanding how to rightly divide his word of truth, understanding the difference between the Melchizedek priesthood and the Aaronic Levitical priesthood, understanding the blood ratified covenant confirming gospel message that has made us his kingdom of priests, understanding how to remove our sandals of authority and not walk in that anymore and walk in his authority. Because with him, that's where the power is. So this Heart and Soul series, I so deeply want us to have this awareness of what brokenheartedness means and a fragmented soul means, and to encourage everyone that there is hope and healing for the fragmented soul. There is hope and healing, but if you're not aware what's going on with you, how are you going to heal yourself? How are you going to help other people? You're not, because you don't have an awareness. But Yah has just lifted the veil. Boom. He wants us to see this. He wants us to be able to help, because there's going to be a lot of people out there really needing help when everything starts to break loose around them. And guess who? Tag, you're it. Because you have more understanding than most out in this fallen world. So a good starting place is like we're doing. We're coming together. We're talking about it. But it's also by going through the full series and utilizing the workbooks that Pastor Bob Strachan has put together. because this is a tried and true method he's put together, not Libby. This is a tried and true method he has put together, and him and his wife have proven this successful time and time again in sessions with those that have been severely fragmented. The 5 V's can also be used to train coaches in assisting others. Some of you may feel called to this field of ministry, but all of us will gain insights as good Samaritans to help point fragmented souls in the right direction, because you just can't tell them just to go anywhere. You just can't. So I'd like us to briefly go over the 5 V's that Pastor Bob Strachan reviews in his Fragmented Soul series. And like I said, this is a proven approach. He shares that other counselors may use different tools, but for now, he suggests going through this foundational series without jumping around to this, that, or the other counselor or other process. I mean, there's some pretty good secular processes out there, but they may lead you down more of a spirituality path rather than Jesus of Nazareth path. And that can be dangerous, definitely, in itself. One approach is pretty popular these days. It's put out by Richard Schwartz. He's written a book, No Bad Parts. And he does have some good insights. Like I said, the secular realm can bring help to people, but only Yahusha can heal and integrate those parts. And what happens when there is a demonic influence in there? When that demonic influence doesn't pass the Jesus test, when that individual actually needs deliverance, does the secular world know how to do that? I don't think so. I haven't seen it. But Yahweh has always had this in his word. And so that's why he wants us to know this. And I believe this is, for now, the best approach that I've come across. And I'm very thankful that I've come across it. So we'll briefly go over these 5 V's and stick to this approach, because it's presently the only one I feel comfortable with, because it is Bible-based and it connects the participant to Yahusha, Jesus of Nazareth. And I will be referring to Yahusha several times as Jesus of Nazareth. I mean, some people get triggered by Jesus because they feel like you should use his proper name. Well, I understand that. And we do want to bring honor and glory to him at any time we can. But when you understand the fragmented soul, when you understand that there may be a part in an individual that is a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, maybe a 7-year-old, if you commune with that part and say Yahusha HaMashiach, they won't know who you're talking about, because most of us were raised, it was Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth. I'm fully aware that there's other Jesuses out there, but if we clarify Jesus of Nazareth, is perfectly fine. So it is best to have a good biblical foundation before delving too deeply into this topic. So there's ways that we can lead people to get that biblical foundation as well, but it doesn't hurt them to be aware of these things. So the first V is violation that Pastor Bob goes over. All fragmentation comes from some form of violation of our soul. And our soul, our psyche, is our mind, will, and emotions. It is necessary to recognize a particular violation that took place. There is no point treating a bullet wound as a broken leg. So what you're dealing with violation, the key word associated with violation, what's been violated? It's our soul. It's our soul that's been violated. I mean, those deep wounds, those wounds that it seems like we forgot to hold up the shield of faith to deflect those fiery darts, and bam, it hits us. It hits us right in the soul. So Bob Strachan found that all fragmentation comes from some form of violation. The word violation covers a broad spectrum, pretty much everything from various forms of verbal and physical abuse, which are all violations of our soul. Very rarely does anyone go through some form of abuse, some form of physical trauma, and not be affected psychologically in the psyche. Psychology is just the study of the mind, of the psyche, of the soul. So Pastor Bob says we could call it soulology if we really want to be biblical about it. But the word psyche or psyche in Greek is the word for soul. Our soul is our mind, will, and emotions. And every time there has been a trauma, every time there has been an abuse of some kind, our soul is affected. I mean, just think about it. You can think back and think of those times you were violated. You just kind of, well, that's the past. Is it? If you're still thinking about it, are you healed from it? I don't think so. That's where communing with your soul comes in. You know, commune with your soul. Maybe remember that time you were in the 7th grade and such happened. You know, you don't want to relive the traumatic experience. You don't have to go through every detail and re-traumatize yourself. But speak to that brokenness in your soul and let that broken part at whatever age, talk to that broken part at the age it occurred. Speak to that part in language it understands. Reassure that part, validate that part, love that part, because all of our parts make us who we are. We don't want to cast them out. We don't want them to feel more exiled than they already feel. So the majority of the time, any violation of that soul will cause a fragmentation of the mind, the will, and the emotions. From that fragment or break is where we get the term heartbroken. And we trivialize that term. Oh, that breaks my heart. And I don't even think we comprehend what a true broken heart is. Thus, when something traumatic has happened in your life, there's been a violation. There's been a violation of the soul. And the key word associated with violation is soul, because that's what's been violated. The next V is ventilation, because isn't that what we need? After we've been violated, don't we need to ventilate? We need to ventilate properly. And it's imperative. It's very healing to be able to ventilate. And so it is imperative that we talk about the violation. We need to release what is hidden or stored up. Sometimes just the ventilation is enough for the individual to move on. Other times it's just the beginning of the healing journey. And the key word with ventilation is that whoever you ventilate with, you need to be able to fully trust, or you're going to be more violated. And someone that you can fully trust is Yahusha HaMashiach. So if you don't have anyone around you that you feel is totally trustworthy, and preferably it's someone that has some understanding of what a fragmented soul is and a broken heart is, and if you don't have that around you, remember, we are his kingdom of priests. Remember, you've been exposed. You're aware of resources that will help you. And you know how to come before his throne room. You know how to make petitions before him. And you can speak to that brokenness inside of you because you were there at whatever age it occurred. So we can talk. I want to put this list in reverse. We can talk to Yahusha. We can talk to Jesus first and foremost as we commune with our soul. We can talk to a counselor or a coach. We can talk to a close friend, trustworthy that is, and we can talk to ourselves. This stage is self-explanatory, so we need to ventilate after experiencing a violation in a safe and trustworthy environment. It is imperative that we talk about the violation, but first and foremost, we should bring it to Yahusha. If we don't talk about the event, the emotions may get hidden or pushed down. When something is pushed down, it builds up pressure and is bound to explode. And that we do not want, but it does happen. This can especially be seen in the elderly when they lose control over mental functions. This is when things may start to explode. You may see switches in personalities that can be observed and associated behaviors. Like 1 minute, a person can be as sweet as pie. Then boom, they can switch again and become very angry. This is what tends to happen. Why? Because they pushed down those violations and they trigger emotions, but they never had an opportunity to ventilate or voice those violations. It is like that pressure cooker that builds up and then it needs a release valve. Keep in mind, a coach would not want the individual to share so much detail that they re-traumatize themselves. And we don't want to re-traumatize ourselves in the process either. So we need to be careful about that. And we cannot just say, like I said earlier, we will let Yahweh take care of all of it, because unless we become willing to do something ourselves, God is not going to take care of it. God is not a micromanager. It is not that we can just let go and let Yah. We cannot just put all our issues in the God box and say, well, we'll just let God take care of that. In the context of the 5 V's, it doesn't work like that. And a lot of churches will tell you, just go home and pray about it and let Jesus take care of it. But how do we give it to Jesus if we are not told how to give it to him, nor how to commune with our own soul, nor how to participate in the process? Remember, some people that Yahusha healed, he would tell them to go wash in the pool of Siloam. Well, that person had to go there. He had to participate. It wasn't, the person just wasn't a bystander. So by ventilating to yourself, you are letting part of your soul ventilate to another part of your soul. See, you want the fragmented parts to start communicating and valuing one another. Just as the body of believers, we need to value one another. And valuing one another is going to integrate us and bring us more together. So this is biblical. We have seen how David communed with Yah concerning his soul. Paul instructed us to speak to ourselves and one another in psalms and hymns, spiritual songs. So yes, it is possible and biblical to talk to ourselves and commune with Yahweh for healing. Psalm 4:4. Tremble and do not sin. Speak within your heart on your bed and be still. That's a great place to speak and commune with Yah, on our beds. When there has been a violation, there is usually some kind of anger involved, and it is okay to feel angry. The Bible says to be angry and sin not. Yahweh created us with emotions. Therefore, it is okay to feel and experience various emotions. If you look up all these emotions in the scriptures, you will find that Yah oftentimes has those same emotions. For instance, Yahweh hates sin and Yahweh loves us. We know Yahusha was angry when he saw that the temple had been desecrated by turning it into a den of thieves. His actions were justified. Was his anger valid? Yes. Why? Because they had made his father's house a den of thieves. Thus, he went in to cleanse the temple, and his righteous anger was justified. Today, we are the temple. When things have happened to us and our temple, when our body has been violated, where his Holy Spirit dwells, there can be anger. Why? Because there has been a violation and we can allow ourselves to be angry. The problem comes in is when we let our emotions and our thinking get out of balance. When we let that emotion of anger progress into bitterness, resentment, and vengefulness. Eventually, we want to move on to forgiveness, and that is a process. It doesn't always occur overnight. Usually, true forgiveness doesn't happen very quickly. but it is absolutely essential. So holding on to unforgiveness can even spill over into physical illness and ailments, as I have mentioned before. Whomever we talk to, they need to be someone who will validate our emotions. We need to know that what we are feeling is real and justified. And God created us with emotions, so it's okay to feel those emotions. During this process, we look at each emotion and test its validity. Things like anger, things like rejection are normal. We may feel guilt and shame. That's okay at this stage, but let's note it and come back to that. We should explore the why of these emotions. So these are areas that will give you a foundational starting point to speak to those fragments within yourself. Times of rejection, times of great anger. So with validation, the key word is emotions, because that's what you're validating, is the emotions they felt from the violation. And the violation keyword was soul. Their soul was violated and they have ventilated, and now validation follows. And the key word is emotions. Next is vindication. Vindication is a verb. It means to clear as a form of accusation, imputation, suspicion, or the like. To vindicate someone's honor comes from Roman and civil law to regain possession under claim of title of property through legal procedure, or to accept one's right to possession. In actuality, when we forgive, we are regaining our soul back. We are regaining that bit or part that has been broken. Vindication or forgiveness is where things become a game changer in our favor. The pro to vindication process of forgiveness truly makes us free. It sets the captives free. Forgiveness allows us to regain our true self. That part of us is no longer held captive by that person, place, or thing. It is at this stage that we can shed our anger, our bitterness, and vindictiveness or unforgiveness. So vindication is about forgiveness. Therefore, the key word to this stage is forgiveness. Sometimes we need to forgive ourselves. Sometimes we need to forgive others. Sometimes we may feel that we need to forgive Yahweh because we've blamed him for something. Lastly is eviction. The final step after vindication is eviction. It is here where we dump our baggage. It is here we get rid of stuff and develop boundaries. It is here we may cut off certain connections. We may verbally sever contracts, ties, unholy alliances, and associations with people, places, and things. We are basically carrying out what needs to be done, whether cutting off ties from certain people, places, or things, or breaking and annulling contracts that we have made either verbally or non-verbally. We follow the biblical scriptures to help us identify contracts, pledges, or unholy alliances that we need to cast out or cast down. These are associations and alliances that keep us down. And there's a whole myriad of these contracts. Most of us have had somebody in our family in Freemasonry. Those kind of contracts, they need to be null and void, because children that have been raised in that environment and have been told about such societies, they think, well, it can't be that bad because, well, grandpa told me it was okay. So see, this lie-based belief, this unholy alliance, they're having trouble seeing the truth. And it goes to smaller associations like brownies, like Boy Scouts, like sororities, fraternities, all of these things. We have to evaluate what you have associated with. So this is the purpose of this phase. However, we cannot get to this point until all the other V's have been completed. This is very important. That's why it's a very structured way to approach this topic. So the 5 V's must be done in order. Now, sometimes there is a back and forth between ventilation and validation, but that is a normal communication flow. Order is still maintained. There's no point trying to evict or cut off connections if we have not gone through the rest of the process. It just doesn't work that way. And Pastor Bob Strachan stresses that. For instance, he says a lot of ministries go straight to this 5th point and they call it deliverance. But after a violation, we need to follow these steps. In general, however, when we are not dealing with a violation and we identify alliances and contracts that are biblically not good for us, then yes, we can just deal with such as Yah brings them to our attention. So in other words, when we find out that Freemasonry isn't a really good club to be part of, something very obvious, go ahead and break those alliances, because there's no question about it. So the key word for eviction is deliverance. So it's important to know what part of us is being addressed through the 5 V's. It's our soul. It's our soul. Yahweh has given us this built-in protective mechanism to fragment. It's a good thing. It is like a coping mechanism in order to separate a wounded part of our soul to promote healing. In this way, the rest of the soul may keep on functioning. The rest of the soul can go out and carry out daily routines, even though there's a part in that individual that is broken. Brokenheartedness and fragmentation was meant to be an intermediary coping mechanism. Yahweh never intended for us to stay in a broken or fragmented state. This is a big reason, as we saw in Isaiah 61, why he came. So it is our soul we are evaluating, our heart and soul, to see what condition our condition is in. And our soul involves our mind, will, and emotions. We need to ask ourselves if there are past violations we have suffered and never dealt with. We may have, like I mentioned earlier, little parts within us from childhood that never had closure to the emotions they felt. Maybe they were just told, shut up, go to your room. They never had an opportunity to ventilate and be validated. Please remember, when speaking to little parts, as I mentioned earlier, refer to Jesus as Jesus instead of Yahusha, because they won't know who you're talking about. Whatever the age the part is that you experience a violation, speak to that part as you would that age group. And we'll talk about the parts in our next session next week and go into more detail on those. Before we get into the possible fragmented parts that can occur in someone's soul, let's review what makes up the tripartite man, the spirit, soul, and body. In the One New Man series by Matthew Nolan, we learned that we are a tripartite being, meaning we are made up of our born anew spirit, soul, and body. So our spirit is where our conscience, intuition, and communion exist. Our soul is our mind, will, and emotions. And our body is our temporary earthen vessel, because we are the temple. And we are to guard the walls and gates of our body, our eye gate, our ear gate, our mouth gate, any orifice of our body we are to guard. Our skin, what enters our body, what pierces our flesh, all of these things. We are the temple. Our body, our skin are the walls. And then any orifice of our body is gates. So the soul, however, is the part of us that mediates between the spirit and the body through the will. I'm going to try to visualize and put in an imagery what a fragmented soul looks like. When someone fragments, as Pastor Bob Strachan says, you can have different parts. It's not to say you're going to have so many parts. You may have one or two parts, but a fragmented part of the soul is a genuine part. And there's only one or maybe two that can be influenced by demonic influences. So we may have a genuine presenter part, a genuine condition part that has been raised with much conditioning and under lie-based beliefs. We can have protector parts that just try to protect us, and burden bearers, those that just take on their burdens and other people's burdens. We can have a narrator part. We can have party parts. We can have evil twins. And I think we all have an evil twin to a certain degree. We can have oppressed parts, and we can have clone parts. So Yahweh wants us to fortify and strengthen our soul. For this reason, I believe he wants us to understand more deeply what a broken heart, fragmented soul means. What does it look like? His power, we must remember, is within us. The more we tap into his power that resides in our spirit as our source rather than an afterthought supplement. He is our source. He's not our supplement. He is our first stop, if you will. The more of his power we tap into, he can release through us. Remember Paul in Romans chapter 1:1, he received favor and he received the office of the emissary. Why did he receive the favor? Why did he receive the office of the emissary? He received it because of his belief, obedience. He loved Yahweh with his whole heart. So our healing is first established and strengthened internally, and then his esteem and power can flow through us more powerfully to the external world. The more belief, obedience, the more power. Worldly physicians, remember, heal us from the outside in, but the great physician heals us from the inside out. In Exodus 15:26, we read, and he said, if you diligently obey the voice of Yahweh, your Elohim, so if you diligently obey and do what is right in his eyes, and shall listen to his commands, and shall guard all his laws, covenant laws, I shall bring on you none of the diseases I brought on the Mitzrites, the Egyptians, for I am Yahweh who heals you. So the root not dealt with will manifest. The cause is the root. The symptoms are the ways people try to cope, just like with Matthew Perry, with alcohol, with drugs, with promiscuity, partying, gambling, whatever thing that a person turns to. But the root that we all must deal with is, what will we do with the root of Jesse? Now that's an important root to deal with. What will we do with Yahusha, Jesus of Nazareth? Will we accept his new blood ratified covenant? Will we learn what it contains? Will we walk in belief, obedience to his royal covenant? Do we know what a royal covenant is? Will we commune with him in our soul, in the holy place within us? Some people are very much aware of their individual parts. Not all of us are aware of that. I mean, many of us weren't even really switched on to what a fragmented soul was all about. You know, we saw some of the extreme cases in Hollywood movies and stuff, and we're like, I don't really get that. But it's not as rare as Hollywood movies promote it. And with the amount of violations going on to innocent people these days, it's becoming more and more prevalent. And we are going to be running across more and more brokenness and more fragmented soul. What are we going to do with it? We're just going to ignore it, or we're going to say, oh, well, it's too bad. Really? No, we need to be equipped more for how to deal with this. Just like Jennifer Aniston said, we didn't know, we didn't understand, we didn't know how to deal with it. If anyone should know how to deal with it, we should. So some people are very aware of the individual parts. I never knew that before. I didn't know that some can really be so in tune to their fragmented parts that they can even switch between parts. And they know they're switching between parts. I didn't know that. They are very aware they have different parts within themselves. Now, as you start communing with your soul, you're going to identify some of these parts, but it may be to a lesser degree. It may just be things that happened in your life and you can deal with them. But we have to understand those that have been severely abused are at the other end of that continuum. And if we haven't had that type of abuse and trauma, now there may be challenges to understand and relate to that extent. But Yahweh always understands, and Yahweh can lead you to resources, just as with Pastor Bob Strachan, to know where to take those severe broken fragments and how to deal with them. So some people are very aware of their individual parts. They are very aware they have different parts within themselves. Others may find that their parts are just extreme mood swings that swing from one mood to the other. It varies from person to person. There's no cookie cutter mold that we can tick a box and say, this person is such and such. That's why Pastor Bob says it's a spectrum. No two people have gone through the exact same thing in life. And even if they do, there's a good chance that they would handle the event completely differently from the other one. Because we will see as we get later on in this series that lives are taken and those around them didn't get it. They didn't get the seriousness, and that's usually the case. Why? It's because they didn't understand. They didn't understand what brokenheartedness can do to some people. They projected their own perception of the situation instead of listening and trying to understand what that individual was going through. And the enemy has done a pretty good job at hiding a lot of that from us. So our main focus has been on individuals that have broken hearts or fragmented souls. But this also applies to us corporately. And we will discover that the wilderness tabernacle was a three-dimensional structure to teach us this. But individually is the micro view. So keep that in mind. We are the temple. And as an individual, that's the micro view of spirit, soul, and body. And the wilderness tabernacle was, think of that as the macro view. And it has the Holy of Holies and the holy place and the outer court. So the spirit equates to the Holy of Holies, the soul to the holy place, and the body to the outer court. So individually or corporately, Yahweh wants our focus to turn to Him to achieve healing and integration of our parts. Our lives go in the direction of our focus, and we are meant to follow in His footsteps. Our beliefs and desires determine our fate. Our beliefs and desires determine our fate. These decisions determine our destiny. In Egypt, the Israelites corporately had been violated, had they not? With the first Exodus, had not the Israelites been violated? They were broken. They were fragmented. They were scattered. Did they not suffer also of DID, dissociative identity disorder, as a people group? They didn't know who they were. Were they not slaves? Were they not held captive? in an entangled web of Egyptian captivity as we are today, where there seems to be no way out? Do we not find ourselves in the same predicament internally? Who rescued them? Who rescued them? Who desired to heal them? Who declared them as his firstborn son, Israel, born from above? Yahweh did. And he does the same for us individually. He does the same for us individually. I hope we are seeing the picture of the one new man, the body of believers, how we are fragmented and scattered abroad, and how our fragmented parts internally can be fragmented as well. Yahweh can gather and integrate our parts individually and corporately. He demonstrated that with the first Exodus. As Israel came out of Egypt and experienced the 42 campsites, we start to see Israel's corporate fragmented parts. We start to see their conditioned parts. We start to see their party parts. Do we not see that in the wilderness with the golden calf? Yeah, we start to see their party parts, their fragmented party parts. How about their oppressed parts? Yep. What about their evil twin parts? Absolutely. We saw that corporately. If we grasp this wilderness macro view of the fragmentation of Israel, we can grasp the micro view of ourselves individually. And that's what I believe we missed. That's what I believe we missed. The final remnant of the one new man is fragmented. Though we want that unity, though we long for that unity, we're made up of a bunch of broken people. And in the process of time, in the sanctification process, Yahweh can heal the body of believers, this final remnant. And he can heal us internally as well by his righteous right hand. So the wilderness tabernacle was the type and shadow of our marriage tent between Yahweh and his bride. Today, our tabernacle exists between our soul communing with his spirit within us. But many of our brothers and sisters do not understand nor relate to this intimacy that should take place between Yahweh and his bride. Because of this, like the Israelites out of Egypt, sin abounds. This was the very reason Yahweh gave them a very harsh schoolmaster, a tutor, named the Book of the Law, to teach them and to spare their very lives. Jacob builds the temple. That takes place in Genesis 28, chapter 28, verse 10 through 22, when Jacob has his dream. It was not solely because he was fleeing the wrath of his brother Esau, but also because he was on his way to Mesopotamia to find a wife and create a family, a house. His father Isaac practically ordered him to leave and start his own family, that he might multiply and become a company of peoples. Later it is said his two wives, Leah and Rachel, are the builders of the house of Israel. Jacob therefore constructed a human temple, a house of 12 tribes. Think of it as like 12 parts, all right? And centuries later, these 12, with the hired Phoenician craftsmen, raised Solomon's stone temple, the house of Elohim. Therefore, the dream concerns the building of two houses, Jacob's, later named Israel, and Yahweh's house. So another illustration is the temple man, because the tabernacle in the wilderness and the temple that was eventually built correlates to our spirit in the Holy of Holies, our soul, the holy place, and the body. So when we commune with Yahweh as his kingdom of priests, we're actually entering in through his gates with thanksgiving, and we're entering into his courts with praise, and we're going before him and communing with his spirit like Moses and Aaron did. The 12 tribes of Israel, the natural branches, and those that continue to be grafted in that are scattered abroad the earth, must all come through Yahusha. They have been broken, they have been fragmented, they have even suffered from dissociative identity disorder, meaning they don't even realize who they are. How many believers don't even realize they are Israel, born from above, the one new man? How many understand that? Not too many, because they're functioning under lie-based beliefs, because they're functioning with weak souls. They do not understand that they are Israel, his firstborn, born from above, versus the present nation in the Middle East, usurping and occupying and redefining the name Israel through a twisted Zionism. Names, history, definitions, they've been flipped, and many of Yahweh's people have been deceived. And we know deception is our greatest enemy in the end of days, and it is rampant. Deception is rampant. Many believers lack knowledge and awareness of how to rightly divide his word of truth. Because of this, listen up, because of this, many may perish. This is serious business. Many are listening to lie-based beliefs from hireling shepherds and pulpits that speak half-truths knowingly or unknowingly. They're listening to the narrative of fake news instead of the truth from his word. So not all that proclaim to be believers in Yahusha, Jesus of Nazareth, know that they have entered into his blood-ratified covenant as his bride. They don't know the full meaning of that. They may not understand that we are now his kingdom of priests after the order of Melchizedek. Sadly, many have been taught a diluted version of the gospel message. They lack knowledge of what exactly royal covenant Torah contains versus the book of the law. Therefore, how would they even know what commands he desires for his bride to honor and possess? The lack of knowledge is very detrimental to his people. My people have perished for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I reject you from being priest for me. Did you hear that? Hosea 4:6, did you hear that? My people have perished for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I reject you from being priest for me. Since you have forgotten the Torah of your Elohim, I also forget your children. You see, only his priests, after the order of Melchizedek, understand how to properly enter and function in the holy place. And where did we learn that? We learned that in the wilderness tabernacle, and we're about to review that right now. Because most people don't know the front of the Bible. And that's where you learn these things. We should know the whole Bible, the front and the back. And so many churches have done away with the front part of the Bible, and they focus strictly on the New Testament, thereby missing their true identity of who they are and not understanding how to rightly divide his word of truth. He taught us so much with the wilderness tabernacle. Yahweh dwelt among the Israelites through a tent. Now, he dwells within his people, within you, within me. He dwells within us. He's with us. Now he dwells within his people through the Spirit.
The tabernacle, Hamishkan. The Hebrew word means dwelling place. It was where God dwelled with his people, and its elements show us how to relate with God. After delivering the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, God gave them detailed instructions on how to build this dwelling. Once constructed, the Lord descended on the tabernacle in a pillar of cloud. Curtains separated the whole tabernacle from the rest of the Israelite encampment. In this courtyard was the tabernacle's largest piece of furniture, the altar. A wooden box covered with bronze. The altar was shaped as a square, measuring approximately 7.5 feet long and 7.5 feet wide. From top to bottom, it stood about 4.5 feet. Hollow space inside the box allowed priests to insert coals. Above was a bronze grating where priests would lay animals for sacrifice. A horn of one piece with the altar stood at each corner. 4 bronze rings under the ledge allowed one to insert carrying poles so the Israelites could transport the altar. Between the altar and the tent of meeting was a bronze laver. Priests had to cleanse their hands and feet here before offering sacrifices or entering the tent. Within the inner tent stood one of the most recognized elements of the whole tabernacle, the menorah, a lampstand with 3 branches that rose on each side to create a total of 7 lamps. This solid gold lampstand weighed about 75 pounds. Each lamp was a small cup that the priest would fill with oil to fuel the light. Each branch in the middle of the shaft had almond blossoms. The menorah served a most practical purpose. It was the only source of light in the tent, an eternal light that was never to go out. Also in the tent stood a wooden table covered with gold. On it was to always remain the bread of the presence. The bread of the presence symbolizes God's desire to be with his people. Incense was to burn continuously on the altar. God instructed the priests to replenish the incense every evening and morning. A curtain separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies. The menorah, the altar of incense, and the bread of the presence were all in the holy place, but outside this veil. Like the curtains covering the tent of meeting, this veil was blue, purple, and scarlet, with cherubim, a kind of angel. Beyond the veil, at the far end of the tabernacle, was the ark. The ark was a wooden box covered with gold. It was nearly 4 feet long. Its width and height were about 2 feet, 3 inches. Like the altar, the ark had rings and poles so the Israelites could carry it as they traveled. Within the ark were the 2 stone tablets on which God had written the 10 Commandments. Later, it contained a sample of manna and the rod that bloomed to reinforce Aaron's leadership. The mercy seat was the ark's lid and features prominently on Yom Kippur, or the Day of Atonement. At each end stood a cherub facing the other with its wings outspread. This cover was made of solid gold. The priest would sprinkle the blood of the sacrifice on this mercy seat, symbolizing that the nation's sins were covered for another year. While only the high priest would see it, the mercy seat was the key symbol of atonement that God would forgive his people. Though daily sacrifices on the altar were necessary for payment of sin, it was only through the mercy seat on the Day of Atonement that the stain of sin was washed away. While priests had to make repeated sacrifices, one man offered a sacrifice to atone for sin once and for all. When Jesus, the Messiah, died, he sprinkled his own blood before God, securing atonement forever for all who would trust in him. Jesus cleanses us, makes us pure, and enables us to rightly approach the Lord. He tore the veil that kept distance between Israel and the Lord. God dwelled among the Israelites through a tent. Now, he dwells within his people through the Spirit.
So hopefully this presentation is bringing a greater awareness of brokenness around us every day. Remaining in a broken state may become very serious and can even lead to death. Some may be called to become a coach in this area, and some may just want to go through the Fragmented Soul series by Bob Strachan. Sometimes we may be thrust into a situation where we just have to function as the Good Samaritan and at least offer a listening ear, at least understand the 5 V's, at least be there with compassion for someone else. There are numerous resources in preparing oneself for external disasters, but are we prepared for internal disasters? I think not. And we saw that demonstrated with Matthew Perry. He wasn't prepared for his internal disaster. And the question is, can someone as troubled as Matthew Perry be saved and still have severe fragmentation? Yes, because we also know it is only Yahweh that truly knows who are his people and who are not. We must remember it is the spirit in us that is born anew when we give our life to Yahusha. The soul is a daily work in progress, but however, we should see progress. We shouldn't use that as an excuse. There should be, that individual should start producing fruit, showing fruit of progress. So I came across this other little clip. I wasn't planning on showing it, but I am. And it kind of gives us the background story of Matthew Perry. And honestly, in Matthew Perry's final days, he was more interested in helping others out of the prison that he found himself in. And he believes he did find that source, God, that could be the only one that could help him. What was his final outcome? We may not know until we're in the heavenly presence of Yahweh. But I think this gives us an insight, and I believe Matthew Perry would be blessed to know that there are individuals that care, and we do want to know how to be aware and how to help others in this situation, and also how to help ourselves, and also how to be a unifying part of the 12 tribes scattered abroad to help Yahweh in the process of integrating all of our scattered parts.
Matthew Perry's tragic and unexpected death has led to a lot of confusion around what exactly he believed about God in the afterlife, with most of the confusion stemming from a spiritual experience that he had just a few years before his death. After hitting rock bottom, he called out to God when he noticed a flicker of light in his kitchen. This flicker continued to grow until he was completely surrounded by a light that was far brighter than the sun. But what happened next only makes sense once you understand his spiritual journey that led up to this pivotal moment in his life. At the age of 14, Perry had his first encounter with alcohol and was surprised by the effect that it had on him. He describes it by saying, "For the first time in my life, nothing bothered me. The world made sense. I was complete, at peace. I'd never been happier than in that moment."
I just sort of drank this entire bottle and just was in heaven.
It was only later that he realized that drinking was the first way that he tried to fill a spiritual hole in his life. He said, "Whatever holes you're filling up seem to keep opening back up. Maybe it's because I was always trying to fill a spiritual hole with a material thing." But rather than alcohol fixing the problems in his life, he started to realize that it couldn't. And it was then that he believed that fame would be the solution. He wrote, "By 1986, I was pretty sure fame would change everything, and I yearned for it more than any other person on the face of the planet. I needed it. It was the only thing that would fix me. Living in LA, you would occasionally bump into a celebrity, or you'd see Billy Crystal at the Improv, make a note of Nicolas Cage in the next booth, and I just knew they had no problems. In fact, all their problems had been washed away. They were famous." But after exactly almost 10 years after the first drink of alcohol that brought him so much peace, he found himself making his very first prayer to God.
And then I knelt down and said, "God, you can do whatever you want to me. Just please make me famous."
And only 3 weeks later, Perry got casted for the famous sitcom Friends, which changed his life forever. And about his prayers being answered, he said that God had certainly kept his side of the bargain, but the Almighty, being the Almighty, had not forgotten the first part of that prayer as well. But what followed in the years to come made Perry regret that he ever made that prayer in the first place. It wasn't long before Perry realized that becoming rich and famous wasn't any more capable of fixing his problems than alcohol was. He said that it only took him 6 months to realize that being rich and famous wasn't going to fill the void in his heart. Not only did becoming rich and famous not solve all of his problems, but he was now feeling more and more empty than ever before. After losing hope for fulfillment, he got to a place where he would just settle for moments of happiness. In order to feel better, he turned to the only place he found peace in his teens: alcohol. but only this time he accompanied alcohol abuse with drug abuse as well. Becoming so desperate to feel better, Perry's drug use continued to grow until it spun out of control. He said, "Alcoholics and addicts like myself want to drink for the sole purpose of feeling better. Well, that's at least true for me. All I ever wanted was to feel better. I didn't feel good, I had a couple of drinks and I felt better. But as the disease progresses, it takes more and more and more and more and more and more and more to feel better. I had a bottle of vodka next to me. I made myself 13, 14 drinks, but homemade drinks, so triples. And after the 14th drink, I wasn't drunk anymore. So I quit drinking. I think now I'm at the point with opiates where it's the same situation. They are just not enough. I took 1,800 milligrams of opiates in Switzerland per day and wasn't high. So what am I gonna do? Call a drug dealer and ask for all of the drugs? But this consistent and heavy drug use came to a halt when Perry found himself an inch away from death. He almost died and was placed in a coma for 2 weeks, followed by another 5 months in the hospital. In addition, he underwent 14 stomach surgeries due to a ruptured colon that was caused by his drug use. But even after going through all of this wasn't enough to keep him off of drugs for good. It was only when he was at absolute bottom that he prayed for the second time in his life, and he says that this is when God stepped in. Exactly 10 years after the day he first prayed to God, almost to the very day, he offered his second prayer to God. After describing how broken he was, he said that when he was in his kitchen, he noticed a crinkle in the atmosphere that captivated his full attention. I frantically began to pray with the desperation of a drowning man. "God, please help me," I whispered. "Show me that you are here. God, please help me." As I prayed, the little wave in the air transformed into a small golden light. As I kneeled, the light slowly began to get bigger and bigger until it was so big that it encompassed the entire room. It was like I was standing on the sun. I had stepped on the surface of the sun. What was happening? And why was I starting to feel better? And why was I not terrified? The light engineered a feeling more perfect than the most perfect quantity of drugs I'd ever taken. And for the first time in my life, I was in the presence of love and acceptance and filled with an overwhelming feeling that everything was going to be okay. I now know that my prayer had been answered. I was in the presence of God. I started to cry. I really started to cry. That shoulder shaking kind of uncontrollable weeping. I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because for the first time in my life, I felt okay. I felt safe, taken care of. Decades of struggling with God and wrestling with life and sadness all washed away like a river of pain gone into oblivion. I've been in the presence of God. I was certain of it. And this time, I had prayed for the right thing. Help. Some might write it off as a near-death experience, but I was there. And it was God. It was in that moment that he believed that he experienced the ultimate source of joy, being God himself, and therefore Perry had no desire for the counterfeits of joy found in drugs and alcohol. Following this experience, he stayed sober for years solely based on that moment alone. He said that God had shown him a sliver of what life could be, and this turned him into a seeker of God. However, even though he claimed to never touch alcohol again, he eventually had a drug relapse 2 years later. And it was at this point that he developed a more complicated relationship with God, feeling frustrated for the life that he had. He said, "Even though I have a relationship with God, and I'm so grateful despite everything, I sometimes do want to tell God to go blank himself for making my road so hard. Why is it so hard for me to stay sober when I see my fellows seemingly doing it easily? Why has my road been so racked with difficulty? Why have I wrestled so hard with life?" But despite his frustrations with God, Perry still believed that God saved his life for a purpose. Just a year before his death, he wrote, "I was a kid from Canada who had all of his dreams come true. They were just the wrong dreams. God is always there for me now whenever I clear my channel to feel his awesomeness. It's hard to believe, given everything, that he still shows up for us mortals, but he does. And that's the point. Love always wins." In his final years, Perry believed that God's purpose for his life on this planet was to help others.
If somebody comes up to me and says, "I can't stop drinking, can you help me?" I can say yes and follow up and do it. That's the best thing.
He turned his former Malibu home into a sober living facility called the Perry House, which ran until 2015, and he continued to help countless individuals in their journey to sobriety until he died. And when it comes to death, he even said that when he dies, he wants to be remembered the most for helping others.
When I die, I don't want friends to be the first thing that's mentioned. I want that to be the first thing that's mentioned, and I'm going to live the rest of my life proving that.
When it comes to his final religious beliefs, he kept his religious beliefs private for the most part, but from reading his book and paired with other things that I've heard him say, it seems to me that he most likely was a Protestant or a Catholic. But as I read his book in preparation for this video, I quickly realized how similar his experience with addiction sounded to something that all of us can relate to. Just as Perry describes how indulging in drugs required more and more in order to produce the same feeling of happiness, the same thing is true about sin for all of us. Sin promises that we'll be happier if we just indulge in it. And like drugs, it does make us happier for a moment. But as time goes on, it takes more and more in order to give us the same degree of happiness that we first experienced. And the more that we realize its inability to make us happy in the long run, the more it takes us further and further away from the ultimate source of happiness, God himself. After Perry's experience that he believed he had with God, he knew that anything less than God himself would ultimately be unsatisfactory. And that's when I realized that we all have a little Matthew Perry inside all of us, thinking that we know what we need in order to solve our problems and to be happy. And the reason why sin is so enticing is because at some level we believe that we can get that happiness apart from God and what he says is good for us. But if we're unlucky enough to achieve the thing that we think will ultimately fulfill us, we'll eventually find that it won't. In reality, only an eternal and everlasting relationship with God, the ultimate source of happiness, can truly fulfill us. And if I could just take it one step further, the only reason that we could have a relationship is because of Christ, who died so that we could be in a rightful relationship with him for all of eternity. Just something to think about. Now, this video is part of our What Do They Actually Believe series, but now it's your turn. Who would you like to see us cover next? Let me know down below, and thank you for sticking around to the end, and make sure to hit the like and subscribe button on your way out. And lastly, please keep the friends and family of Matthew Perry in your prayers, all right? See you guys next time.
So just in a nutshell, the 5 V's can help someone with their fragmented soul. Did Matthew Perry know exactly what was going on with him? Did he understand he had a fragmented soul, a broken heart? What was happening with him at age 14? What had happened to him that wanted a 14-year-old to turn to alcohol? I believe people around him were not truly aware of how to heal that, because we know, we've learned already, have we not, that alcohol, drug abuse, all those things are symptoms. They're not the root cause. They're not the root cause. So take away today the 5 V's, and I want to review their key words. If you have a pen, write these down. First is violation. The key word is that our soul has been violated. So the key word is soul with violation. Secondly, ventilation needs to occur. But the key word with ventilation is trust. We must ventilate to only someone we can trust. And if we don't have that someone around us, then we can ventilate to Yahuwah and commune with our own soul. The third V was validation. And that key word is associated with emotions, because that's what you're validating when someone ventilates to you. Unless they're having a pity party, you're validating the key word emotions. And then vindication, you're working through the process of forgiveness. That's an essential step. Lastly is eviction, deliverance. So violation, keyword, soul. Ventilation, keyword, trust. Validation, keyword, emotion. Vindication, keyword, forgiveness. Eviction, keyword, deliverance. Yahuwah dwelt among the Israelites through a tent. Now he dwells within his people through the Spirit. He's working in us and through us to reach people he loves. This is a great step to understand, to help others, like Matthew Perry. Shabbat Shalom.